So welcome back to another Grief is the Word. That's what I'm calling this mini-series. Some live interviews in recognition of National Grief Awareness Week. And today we're going to focus on bereaved parents and child loss, and feel like this is a really important topic actually, and I'm so glad that the Good Grief Trust have highlighted this as part of National Grief Awareness Week. So I'm joined with a whole combination here of experience and lived experience of losing a child, and also some people that have got great skills and expertise around child loss and working with bereaved parents as well. So Anne Tully, who is not too far from me in the Midlands and who has recently lost her daughter during the pandemic to COVID. So welcome, Anne. Thank you so much for joining us. And also Claire as well, who lost her daughter at a very young age due to sudden infant death. I think I've said that right, Claire, but welcome. And I've spoken to Claire before on my podcast as well about this. And also Jude Hill, who's Life After Loss mentor. Nicole Bowles, a founder of Our Missing Piece, and also Paula Abramson from Bereavement Training International. So welcome everybody. Hope I've got all of your introductions fairly accurate there, but thank you so much for joining me. So I guess I wanted to just perhaps open this up really to just sharing a little bit about experience of being a bereaved parent, and just throwing the question out there, I guess, to start with, for anybody really who just feels like sharing, what your experience of grief is, or maybe it's the experience that you have of working with clients as well who are bereaved parents.
I would say that I become very aware of how uncomfortable people are to talk about grief, and how people project their own feelings and how they would deal with a situation onto you. After I lost Charlotte, I felt extremely judged by society as a whole, really. And I think we talked about this before, that grief is unique as a fingerprint, and how you deal with that is totally up to you. And what I've learned is to not really care what other people want me to do or how I should be dealing with it, because some days I'm fine and other days I'm not, and that's up to me, not other people.
Sorry, I was just going to say, Louise, I'm just listening to you, Claire. I'm aware that so many bereaved parents that I've supported over the years talk about feeling as if they have almost an additional burden to be going through their own grief, but at the same time having to tell other people how they need to be around you, and that's such a huge kind of burden to have to add on to something as tragic and horrific as having lost a child.
I agree with that. The onus is definitely put on the parent to allow the conversation to happen. When Ben died, I found that it was really easy for people immediately to be like, oh, and share memories, but it very quickly became awkward. And unless I was willing to bring Ben into the conversation or talk about my emotions, it was very quickly shut down by other people, because they felt uncomfortable and didn't know if, one, I think they were scared that I would never stop crying, and two, they, like Claire said, they try and put themselves in your situation, and ultimately you never know how you're going to handle a situation until you're in it, and they just become overwhelmed, and in that overwhelmed feeling they just go, oh, I just won't say anything. I found it quite isolating, and families that I talk to say quite similar, that they've either lost friends or they have ended up in a situation where they're just not themselves anymore and just doing it to please other people. I mean, well done, Claire, for finding out 3 years in that you can just do it your own way, because I'm like 8 years in and I've only just come to that conclusion.
I think as well for us, we found out a matter of weeks after Charlotte's death that I was pregnant, which was a complete shock and surprise. So 10 months after Charlotte's death, I had another child, had a little boy, and everybody thought now she's got another baby, she's okay. And I've got my 2 children now and I should be happy, but I will always have 3 children. And that's hard to explain to somebody who hasn't lost a child, that I love my child just as much as you love your living child. Just because she isn't here and I can't hold her doesn't dampen that love at all.
I wonder what you think, so I know that so many parents say to me when they meet new people who don't know what happened to you in the past, and they ask you that question, how many children have you got? And I just wondered how you all felt, because I know that parents often say to me, it really depends on who's asking the question.
Yeah, it's a really difficult one. I mean, I feel guilty when I don't acknowledge Charlotte, but when I'm in a business situation, I set up my business a few months after Charlotte died in her honour. And when I'm in a business situation and I'm pitching and someone says, oh, how many children you've got? I'll probably say 2, just because I don't want to get into that conversation. But if I'm talking to somebody else, I might say I had 3. Unfortunately, I lost my little girl Charlotte a few years ago. But it does depend, and I feel guilt either way. Guilt for not talking about her, but also guilt because you can see people's faces when you say my baby died. I've had people fill up with tears in front of my face before now. So it can depend on how vulnerable I feel that day, or the situation. It's a really difficult one, and I don't think there is a right answer, and it's how you feel that day.
Yeah, it really does. What I'm hearing a lot is that it kind of depends on the situation and who you're talking to, and I guess what you sometimes anticipate the response might be. And I'm just wondering, Anne, obviously you've lost your daughter in very difficult circumstances that are still happening around us now with the pandemic, and I'm wondering about your experience of kind of support and types of conversations you've had around you with people, and whether you've felt similar kind of experiences. Or
I think the COVID situation is so individual. It's every single day. What caused your child's death is in your face every day, all day. There's no escape. It's every time you read a newspaper, turn on the television, it's there. But I think the worst thing is that I last saw my daughter on the 23rd of March because of lockdown. I never saw her again. There was no funeral. There was no going to the hospital for goodbyes. There was no dressing in her own clothes. There was nothing. There was nothing that I could say goodbye to my daughter. Even to the point where we had a small funeral where some family members could attend. Unfortunately, my husband and I couldn't because we were both shielded and we weren't allowed to attend. But we still haven't had a burial. I still haven't got a place that I can go to take flowers, to sit, to remember. So no, it's all very raw at the moment and still.
Yeah.
And I really struggled with that. I couldn't work out what was right to do with Charlotte's ashes. Over 3 years later, I've still got Charlotte's ashes in the box. I picked them up from the crematorium. I don't know what to do, where to put her, where to place her, because nothing seems right. I've got a rose bush in my garden, where I've put a bit of her ashes around. It's a Charlotte rose, and I also got a tattoo with some of her ashes. And I feel I still haven't. I can't imagine how it has been for you, but I still 3 years later don't know where to put her, to go and see her and think about her.
Yeah, Yeah.
And the longer it goes, the less that matters because she's in here.
Yeah. There is. I mean, we know where Lisa's going to go. We've brought a plot for her to go to. My granddaughter, Lisa's daughter, actually chose the plot for her, and we paid for it. The problem is, again, my husband comes from the southwest, so a lot of our family are from that way. They couldn't come up to the funeral, and because of all the lockdown measures and the pandemic measures, we can't even have a burial service because burial rules aren't the same as funerals. Burials, you can only have 6 people. So your priest, your funeral director, and 4 others. It's not enough. It's just not enough.
Yeah, I think this is something I hear, I'm hearing a lot about in terms of the way in which people feel able to or not able to grieve because of, you know, the external situations going on. And I suppose what it just highlights for me, as I guess a practitioner, is that how important it is to feel that we've got the kind of the space to grieve and the connection with other people. Yeah, I think that connection is something that's coming up time and time again, or feeling the kind of loss of connection with others.
Yeah, I think the Yellow Hearts group has been fantastic for people in my situation, and also for for people who've lost their partners, brothers, sisters.
Yeah,
because everyone in that group has experienced the same thing of saying goodbye to the loved ones on one day and literally never seeing them again, never getting any opportunity to say your goodbyes, no closure.
yeah. I think that group definitely has brought a lot of comfort for many people, and I'm in that group, and I can see the kind of the connections forming. And I just wondered, as well as in your experience of all of you being either a bereaved parent or working with bereaved parents, what are some of the things then that you think help to kind of bring people that comfort and provide that comfort?
Well, for me, what I was going to say in response to Anne as well, being it's been a long time coming, because it was 28 years ago that I lost my son, and in the early years I was going to the graveside, that was my place where my logical mind said he was, and I went there, but I never really, everyone's different, but I never personally felt comfort going there. I was going there to desperately feel that connection, because I think that's the biggest thing, no matter how long it is, it's that separation and that connection sort of thing, whether it's 3 years, 8 years, 28 years, that's the biggest thing. And what's been out of my own recent healing journey, and that is that you can connect with them wherever you are. Obviously everyone's got different beliefs on that things, but I think Claire said, they're up in your mind. To me, I say they're in your heart forever, and that's what I say, is that your soul bond can never be broken. So you've not had the normal, for want of a better word, way of doing it, but even when people do go through that, they have the funeral, and outside world think, oh, that's the closure, like they've said to Claire, oh, it was 3 years ago now, or you've got your other children, that doesn't matter. I had my other children 6 and 8 years later, but there was just more trigger points as they come to milestones. That was just another thing I had to deal with, and it wasn't the same. It was a different father as well, so I was literally dealing with it on my own. There was no one that understood what I felt, and I'd lost my parents by that stage as well, so they were the only ones that were really sort of close and part of Adam's life, other than a couple of friends. So it's finding that way of having that connection. So I think someone else talked about things like that, but it's other rituals that you can bring into it as well. So getting together on Zoom maybe with the family, and all have a celebration of a life and what she meant to you all, and you all say one thing. Some people do it where they start off with a letter, or they just go round in something like that, and just allow that space, and what comes out, if people cry and get upset, that's normal, be prepared but it's that ability to let it out, because that was my own personal journey as well. I stuffed a lot down because I just couldn't deal with the pain at the time. I put on that brave face. I was a single mum at the time, so I went back to work so I could afford to keep the home Adam and I had, because that was important to me. So I was like Mrs. Robot at work in the outside world, and it slowly went like that. And then that's why it took so many years for my internal stuff to come up. Yeah, there was stuff across the years that happened, but you know, it had slowly softened. But that was when it came back out. And you know, you do need that space wherever it is to process it, whether that's a group you find, whether it's a counsellor, whether it's some other sort of therapist. I think that's the important thing, that you go and get that support from someone. And as much as friends and family can be well-meaning, there's loads more difficulties that could be a whole conversation in itself with that. But yeah, go somewhere where you're getting that support. And to me, it's important you're getting that support to change and transform and move the energy of the grief, as I say it now. So you're allowing yourself to let that out. You're not holding on to it and letting it block you like I did for many years.
I find that the biggest comfort for me is to make sure that Lisa's name is known. Crazy, my family think I'm mad. Her name is on St Paul's Cathedral, in Rochester Cathedral. I've had a star named after her. I've had a tree dedicated to her. And the more things I do that keeps the name alive, the more comfort I get from it. And I think that's just my way of just dealing with the whole situation.
I set my business up. I'd worked for myself for many years, but as a freelancer, and I set my business up about 3 months after Charlotte died. I decided to, rather than freelance, launch a digital marketing business. And Charlotte was my sunshine. So Sunshine Digital Media was born because I didn't want Charlotte to be the thing that broke me and my family. And I had a 5-year-old daughter as well. And I wanted to do something in Charlotte's name for my family that made her proud of me. And that's given me comfort as well.
Is that similar for you, Nicole?
Yeah, I'm just absorbing everybody because we had my granddad's funeral in lockdown restrictions, and there was only 10 of us, and I found it really challenging. So my heart's really with you, Anne, to not even be able to have just attended that small ritual. And rituals are something that I think are really a foundation to any grief. And there's a reason that we do things in a certain order, so that we can have the next step. And if you don't get what you think is the next step, it can cause that blockage. And so I really feel with Anne at the moment. I think I set up Our Missing Piece for support for bereaved parents, and not to offer support, but to offer signposting services so that bereaved parents can find each other and find their little place where they fit in the world that is they no longer fit in. With Ben, we because he died in such unusual circumstances, it automatically put us in a different tilt on our world, and it meant that I had to create my own things. And when I speak to other bereaved parents, they love seeing their child's name around, and it allows other people to engage in it as well. Like they'll get friends sending them pictures of their names in sands, or I've taken them places, and it allows everybody else to engage in a gentle way and in a respectful way. I think one of the things that, because we have an older son, and then we have Ben who died, and then we've gone on to have 2 other children as well, and we talk about Ben every day, and we ask each other what the favourite part of the day would have been, and then we say, what do you think Ben's favourite part of the day would have been, just so it's positive rather than feeling sad. Because when I talk about Ben, I physically glow because I love him. And that's, I think, what people miss sometimes when they don't understand what a bereaved parent feels like, is we still have that love and that intensity and that fire and that passion for our child, just as we, like Claire said, we have for all our other children. The difference is that other people will ask about our other children, they won't ask about Ben. And that's why I like to challenge people's tilt on stuff and say, well, what do you think of that? And I think that's something that I found really, I don't know, positive in it all, is that I've challenged people's thought processes. and if that makes me a little bit awkward, well, that's there. I think that's one thing that I've learned, is the awkwardness is coming from them, not you. And it's about, because they don't understand the situation or they don't know what to say, and that's not a reflection on the loss or the grief or anything else. It's just that, and that was my starting thing, was I just wanted to break the silence surrounding child loss and being a bereaved parent, because it happens and people just don't talk about it. So I think writing letters was a big thing for me, was just, and especially it's a tool that if you can't get to the place, we moved around a lot. My husband's in the military, and so we've not got one set place where we can go and to a plot or a place. We've got a tree that we planted at where we got married, but that's 3 hours away. And so one of the things that I do is create somewhere everywhere I go that allows me a spot of remembrance. And as it stands now, it's the sea, because I live by the sea. And so for Ben's, it was his 8th year anniversary of his death last week, we put flowers in the sea. And you build your own rituals and own, that's what I do anyway.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Claire. Nicole. That, you know, we can sort of create those special places or rituals or whatever it is that actually helps us, because different things work for different people. But actually, we can, you know, create that sort of on the inside, as opposed to, you know, it having, especially now during, you know, this challenging situation where it might be more difficult to have that kind of physical space to do that. So yeah, I think that's fantastic.
Sorry.
No, you carry on.
I well, just listen to all of you, and I'm just, there's so much that it reminds me of in terms of, you know, just being able to support parents, and just a couple of things like saying their name is so important. And I know that, and I don't know if this is your experience, and I know this is probably too soon to ask you this question, but I know that parents often say that after the first year has passed, so after there's been the first anniversaries of everything that represent your child who died, a lot of people just stop talking about your child, and parents say to me, I desperately want people to say my child's name, even though I might become upset, I might shed a tear, but, you know, the worst thing has already happened to us. They can't possibly upset us anymore because the worst thing has happened. So I think saying their name is just so important. And one of the other things is that you don't stop being your child's mum. Your child might not be physically here with you, but you continue to be mum to the child who has died. And I think that is such an important thing. And when I've been in therapy sessions with bereaved parents, and I will ask the question sometimes, tell me about your ongoing relationship with your child. And they look at me as with such relief that actually somebody can ask them that question, because other people, their friends or their family, might think they're quite mad if you talk about an ongoing relationship with a child who's died. But those, and we use the phrase continuing bonds in the therapy world, but you don't stop being your son or your daughter's mother. And I think having people acknowledge that is just so important for parents. And just, if I may just say one other thing, because there's this wonderful phrase that we use, which is growing around your grief. And particularly bereaved parents tell us that they really don't like people talking about the idea that they should be moving on or getting over.
No.
You know, when a child has died, you never get over the death of a child, and whether that's a tiny baby or a full-grown adult child, it's the same. You don't get over, you don't move on, and bereaved parents tell us often that they don't want to let go of their grief, because letting go of the grief somehow represents letting go of their child. So what we talk about in the bereavement therapy world is this idea that the grief stays the same size, but the space around the grief is bigger and allows you to live a happy, contented life. And obviously, Anne, it's so soon to be talking about that to you, and I'm aware of that, but I can see some others of you nodding.
I would say that obviously my biggest fear is losing one of my other children, but beyond that, it's people forgetting about Charlotte, and that she was here. That's what I fear, and I probably talk about her quite often, and more than maybe people think I should, because I feel that I have to keep that memory alive somehow.
Yeah.
And it's interesting what you were saying about you kind of the hole that grief leaves. I always say that although I wouldn't say I'm happier now, the pain doesn't subside, but I'll always say that my heart keeps beating, but it's got a Charlotte-sized hole in the middle of it, and it doesn't get easier, but you do learn to live with it. And I would say 3 years in that I have much more good days than bad days. But yeah, with me, as soon as my son was born, it was right. Okay, you're all right now. We can forget about her, but that will never happen.
Yeah. Can I just ask? I mean, those of you that have lost children, sort of quite a few years ago, how do you deal with the guilt of the?
That's a really good question.
You know, I struggled that I couldn't be there with her. You know, all the things that as a parent you should do, and I wasn't able to.
I had Charlotte in my bed with me when she died, and that could have been a factor. They couldn't say it was that, but they couldn't say it wasn't. I comforted my child, who was not very well, who was fidgety, and it's something that I'd done lots and lots of times before. And I will always wonder, what if I hadn't have picked her up when she was crying? What if I'd have left her in a cot? My husband reheated some spaghetti bolognese for a tea that night. He thinks that if he'd have heated that for another minute, that things might have been different.
Yeah.
And I still feel massive guilt, and I still kick myself and just think, should I have just left her? But what I would say is, as time's gone on, and this might not be the right word, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what happened and why they're not here. That the anger that I felt from the fallout from that kind of subsides, and you're left with the grief, because you can't change what happened, and you need to find a way of dealing with it. And I had so much anger for about 18 months after Charlotte died about the way that it was dealt with. And then when I had my son, I had all these agencies swarming on me to make sure I never took him in bed, and it was just horrendous. And that's gone now, because I will always feel the guilt, but then I feel the guilt towards my other children as well. Like if I let my little boy run and he falls flat on his face and busts his lip like he does when he's a boy, I feel guilty, because I'm like, I should have been holding his hand. Such a bigger thing, but that's the thing that I would say, the further away from it I get, the less the how mattered, how and why. And it's really difficult for you, because Charlotte had to have a post-mortem, and I know it was several weeks before we could get her body back and have a funeral, and I know how horrendous that was for us, looking back on it. And as Nicole was saying about there's a process you go through, and that is part of the process. But what I would also say with the process, it's not a straight line. You can go back and forth in that process. And when it's birthdays or Christmases or Mother's Day is horrendous. Mother's Day is absolutely horrendous. But I've got an 8-year-old and a 2-year-old who want to make a fuss of me, and I've got to, for them, put a face on. Whereas all I want to do is just hide. Father's Day, Charlotte died on Father's Day. So for my husband, it's absolutely horrendous. So I suppose what I'm saying is that it will eventually, you'll find a way to live with it. And the guilt, it was beyond your control. You couldn't see her.
I think, thank you so much, Anne, for bringing that up, and also Claire for sharing so honestly with your experience around that, because there are so many different emotions, aren't there, associated with grief: guilt, shame, anger, frustration, sadness, despair. You know, we could go on all day naming. I guess overall, from my perspective, it's just this process of acceptance is what comes up for me, the word acceptance, and that, you know, that like Claire has said, there's no timeline for that process, is there? And it is however we kind of work through that. But I really love what Paula was sharing about the Tompkins model, about how we sort of grow around our grief, and those grief emotions might still be there and come up at various times, but we sort of like widen our capacity to be able to be with all those different emotions. So yeah, I mean, please, you know, share your thoughts on that as well. But I think acceptance is the word that comes up for me the most there. It's that process of being able to do that and accept our experience of loss.
I think there's also, I don't know if you're aware, I think you're talking about the kind of different phases of grief, and the idea is that you go through the different phases and you get to a point of acceptance. And it's interesting because in more recent years, there's a therapist, I think his name is David Kessler, and he's added a 6th stage, and it's about making meaning. And I think that concept of making meaning, particularly for bereaved parents, is really important. And I know that you've already discussed it, but and some of you here are doing this, you know, setting up a charity or some kind of fundraising as a legacy to your child who has died. And I think, I don't know if you'd agree, but that's something about making meaning, like having something good that can come out of something so tragic, I think is what parents often, and I think as well as growing around the grief, another phrase that we often use is living alongside your grief. You know, this idea that it's always there with you. But it kind of doesn't become something to be fearful of. It's almost, I don't know how you might describe it, but almost becomes your friend, if that makes sense. You know, this grief is always here with you, and you learn to live alongside it. And every day will bring different feelings, and something might happen like Father's Day or something that will trigger off maybe really difficult feelings, and the grief feels much stronger on that day, but on other days it's just there and it's quite fairly quiet and passive. And yeah,
I think grief, these aren't my words, but I've read them somewhere, it escaped me. Grief is the price you pay for love. So grief it's a hard feeling, but it's not negative, not necessarily a negative feeling, because on those days when you're thinking about them more, the grief is extremely difficult, but other days it's not as bad, and it does, and I think that's eventually how you kind of move forward. We don't like that word, but it's definitely like waves, and some days those waves are calm and other days they knock you off your feet.
And
I guess
with a child, you know, because there's that unconditional love, isn't there, and you have loved that child so hard unconditionally that you know, makes sense to me that grief would be very intense. And for, you know, it's different for everybody, but there is, I think, for a lot of parents that level of pain is felt, you know, quite deeply, really, and that sort of makes sense to me. So I mean, we could talk about this for hours. It's such a huge subject, isn't it? And there's just so much that can be said. But I guess I was just thinking about if there were sort of people out there that maybe were watching this and had lost a child, or how, you know, whether that's recent or, you know, years ago, but struggling with that aspect of their grief. What would there be some sort of words of wisdom or some words of comfort that you would offer? What would you say?
I would personally say that with people say like time's a healer. That's absolute nonsense. What happens with time is you become more familiar with those feelings. So 8 years in, I know when the bad days are going to hit, and I can feel it, and I acknowledge it and ride it, because I've found that the more I fight back and go, no, I'm okay, the harder it hits. Whereas if I just go with it and allow myself, now it's moments of just sheer, like, the immediate grief that you feel, that immediate intense grief has never left me. But what happens is now I actually welcome it, because it's like a memory. Sometimes you think, oh, it's going to fade, and then you're hit with it and you're like, oh, it still means that much, it's still that important to me, it's still like that all consuming. And initially when Ben died, it was the hardest thing, and I wanted it to go away so much, that intense pain. Whereas now I welcome it, because that intense feeling is that intense love. And you just, that building around your life around the grief, and saying the grief never changes shape. I really like that. But also there's parts of the time where grief is all consuming, and the rest of your life can't take over. And there's other times when the ball around it is you can go day to day, and that's fine. But then there's those other days when that's it, that's all you've got is the grief. And I would say just go with it, and it's okay, because those tears, you can't cry forever. I've tried, it's impossible. At some point you'll have a crack, and you'll just have a laugh and be like, this is ridiculous, because you'll make a sound that sounds like some animal, and you'll be like, did that come from me? and you'll check yourself, and you'll reset, and it's all okay. Those moments of intensity don't last forever, so just go with them and allow yourself to feel it, because it helps. It definitely helps. That would be my biggest tip.
I love that, Nicole.
Do.
It's yeah, I mean, I teach mindfulness as well, so very much a part of that is about leaning into our emotions, the difficult emotions as well, and feeling all of those. And I think that's a really, really great thing to highlight, Nicole, so thank you. Yeah. What about you, Jude? What would be your sort of words of wisdom or comfort? Or
I think the main thing is going within and finding that new connection, whatever it is, whether it's a relatively new grief or you're midway, you know, on the journey to find that connection, because that's what I didn't have when I had my other two children. They obviously, like the others have, you know, I talked about Adam, and, you know, I was the only one to introduce Adam and their grandparents on my family's side like that. And, you know, we used to go to the grave every week, because that was the spot, that was our focus then. But they've grown up really connected, and when I did my book launch, that was the thing that really got me that night. I had my eldest son burst into tears and have to go out after my speech and have his girlfriend to comfort him, and then my youngest one went down to Sittingbourne, where the grave is, about half an hour from here, and then phoned me sobbing from there. He was going, can I go there? And I was going, no, darling, it's going to be shut this time of night. So even though they'd never met, because Adam would have been their older brother, they still have got this really strong connection like their brothers from talking about them. So I think it is talking about them, you know, whoever it is that's passed on, to keep their memory alive. But I think particularly with children, as others have said, the outside people feel uncomfortable. And I was a bit two-tier in my early years, and it was a bit different then with social media, and there wasn't this sort of thing there. So within the family, he was always talked about, but externally people didn't know, because when my grief resurfaced all those years later and I found that way to deal with it, it was like then everyone else, oh, I didn't realise she had another son. Because I think, like some of the others have said earlier, when you get asked that question, you know, how do you know, it's just easier sometimes to say, oh, I've got two boys, you know, especially if, I think Claire said, in the work situation, you know, if it's in that more situation where you don't know people, you know, when you get to know people for a lot longer, then sometimes it comes out, and then it wraps up all those things of the guilt, and but within your heart you still love them, and you've got that connection forever. And that's what I do now. I just zone in, and I really don't go to the graveside anymore, because it lessened off a little bit as the other boys had got older, but I can connect with him wherever I am. So I think it's finding whatever your way. And I had rituals and things. There was a little hat that he'd made at playgroup, and that used to go on the top of the Christmas tree every year, because when I had the other children, I wanted to make Christmas special for them, and I didn't want to spoil their Christmas. So it was like we had our ritual. We went to the grave sort of Christmas Eve and did the flowers thing and that, and then the hat was on the tree for Adam, and then I did bury some of it, but I carried on Christmas Day, making it the happy day for them and suppressing some of my emotions. But then you need to find a way to outlet those, otherwise they'll come back years later, as I led. So that's what I try and do in my work, give people that space where they can, and they can outlet them in a safe space, but in a way where you can, whatever words you want to use, move and grow through your grief. Because I also believe that each person within them, they've got their life, and I know that was one of the things at a young age for me. I couldn't imagine ever not having that pain, but equally I was 24 at the time, and I thought, average life expectancy, I've got 40-50 years on this earth. I couldn't, the thought of living with that pain for the next 40-50 years was worse. So it was that battle, and you pushed on through it, and day by day you slowly dragged yourself through it. But if you can have ways, and seek help and support from where you need it, and find a way that you can release what's coming up for you.
So finding ways to kind of release whatever you need to, and also making those connections are really important as well. Thank you, Jude. Anne, I know it's early days for you, but I guess it might be I think really helpful to share with people perhaps what might one thing that might have helped you right now and brought you a bit of comfort, and what
well, I think, as we've said previously, for me to keep Lisa's memory alive is massively important to me. And I think, as some of the other ladies said, having some good come out of what's happened, something positive that has come out of a death and will come out of a death. And I do like to feel as though we can, particularly now, because obviously we're back in the pandemic again. There are going to be a lot of parents feeling like I feel, and I would like to think that they will have somewhere to turn. I was lucky, I found that Yellow Hearts group very early, and that has been massively important, because you're with like-minded people who feel what you feel. They understand the disbelief that you can walk away from your loved one 1 second and literally never see them again. So there's that disbelief of, did it really happen? And there's nothing tangible there to say, yes, it did. You've got no chapel of rest. You've got none of the rituals that you would normally associate. No great wake, that you can have this celebration of the person's life. Again, not allowed. So I think the main thing for me is to make Lisa's death count for something.
So going back to what Paula said about the finding meaning,
absolutely
seems really important. And also the fact that you, like you said, the Facebook group, which is fantastic. We'll be talking to some more people from there in a couple of days, but to reach out really, and to be around people that you feel perhaps understand, or have had that kind of similar experiences, is really helpful.
Absolutely. I think empathy was so important for me, because we've got close friends who knew Lisa all her life, and obviously loved her and missed her as much, well, not as much as we did, obviously, but did miss her and love her. But they couldn't get past the difference in losing someone in this pandemic.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
they'd lost people close to them. Yes, I know how you feel. No, I'm sorry, but you don't. You don't. You were with your loved one. You said goodbye. You went to the chapel of rest. You had your fabulous funeral. You had the best send-off you could possibly do. We have been denied all that.
So definitely reaching out and seeking that support is really important. So thank you. Thanks, Anne. Claire, what would be your words?
I suppose for me, Charlotte was the most sunny, happiest baby. We said the day before she died, she's almost too good to be true, because she just was. And she was never a minute's trouble. And sometimes people say that about people who've died, but in her case, it was true. And I was determined for her legacy not to be something of darkness, for it not to be something that was really sad, because she didn't know sadness. She never brought any sadness in her life. And I didn't feel it was fair to her, for her legacy to be the thing that broke me. So I was determined to kind of keep her alive, and in a positive way, for something positive to come out of what happened. And I suppose what I would say, we're 3.5 years on-ish, you will feel joy again. It doesn't feel like it, and it takes time, but you do feel joy. But the first year is horrendous. And I think, had I not been pregnant with my son, I'm not sure I'd be here.
So finding, I guess, some way to keep faith, would that be similar to what you're saying, or hope?
Just to keep hold of the love and to keep hold of the joy that person brought into your life,
right?
And not just, it's hard when they've just gone to not have it just clouded by that horrible moment. I mean, I had to give Charlotte CPR, and that was like one of my lasting memories of her, and that's not fair, because that's not how she was. And she deserves to be remembered in a better and more positive way than that.
So finding ways to keep that joyful memory alive. Yeah. Thank you, Claire. So Paula, lastly, but certainly not least.
Wow, it's just been a privilege to meet you all and to listen to you. And I guess my takeaway message would be that you're not alone. And you know, there are so many different charities and organisations, and whether it be Facebook groups or Zoom sessions, you know, through this last year, mostly people have been meeting on platforms like this, or whether it be at some point, hopefully not too far off, going back to kind of actually physically meeting people. But I know that bereaved parents tell me that on the whole, they get a huge amount of comfort from being with other parents who might, I mean, you can never say, I know how you feel, because every experience is totally unique. But what I used to say to bereaved parents is, I don't know how you feel, but I think I might have some idea of what might be going on for you right now. And I think just being with other people who have that understanding of what you might be experiencing, and you don't need to be afraid to talk about how you're feeling. You don't need to protect them, because they're bereaved parents as well. So and there are too many to list now, but there are so many different organizations, local, national, and obviously, you know, we're doing this for National Grief Awareness Week, which is linked to the Good Grief Trust, and then there's, you know, the Loss Foundation, and, you know, Nicola, your charity. There are so many charities that act as umbrella organizations that can refer bereaved parents to the organisation that might be right for them. So I guess that's my message, is that you're not alone, and that it's okay to talk about it.
Yeah, thank you, Paula. I think that's a really really powerful message to end on, and I will certainly be putting some of the links to some of the resources around underneath the video somewhere, as to what is available for people, and some signposting as well. So thank you all so much for joining me. Really helpful conversation, I feel, for other people, and just really powerful as well. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.